maybe this is a bad take and I'll just put it out there, but if you're willing to give Kevin...
Yes, sir, there she goes.
Hello and welcome to episode 250 of section 138, the big 250. We're a quarter of the way to 1,000. I'm Mark Colley, your host, as always, joined by Bryson and Jacob. How are you guys?
Doing really good, Mark. Good news today with Bichette, of course. I mean, all the narratives coming into spring training or the last couple months about the whole arbitration issues, I think all of us are relieved, as well as the fan base, that they were able to get something done. However, the long-term issue is still kind of cloudy in terms of what's going to happen with that. But the one thing is, it has been pushed down, I guess, a couple years in the future now. And for the next couple years, arbitration does not have to be talked about with Bichette.
I got to be honest, I was a little bit scared of that. Like it was supposed to be happening tomorrow. We're recording this Wednesday night. I was a little nervous that it was going to be one-sided and then who knows what's going to happen. But we'll get into this later. We do not have to deal with arbitration anymore. Thank God. Now we can just focus on playing baseball and hopefully winning a World Series.
Jacob coming in early with the World Series talk.
Okay, but like,
what else is there? Bingo card.
What else? Yeah, I already scratched the bingo card too.
Now that it's in the conversation, Jacob's just going to rig it. He's going to talk about Pokemon. He's going to talk about the World Series. He's going to talk about
the Leafs.
The Leafs. Yeah, that's the other one that's on the.
It was 8-1.
He's going to have bingo in the first 2 minutes. Okay. Well, yes, we're here to talk about Bichette, the Blue Jays, and him agreeing to right now just a reported 3-year deal to avoid arbitration, to avoid going to that arbitration hearing. They buy out all 3 years of his arbitration, taking him all the way to free agency with the Blue Jays. This is a big deal. At least it seems like that from our perspective. We were here just a couple weeks ago talking about how this arbitration hearing could really negatively impact the relationship between the Blue Jays and Bichette. And instead, we come to the conversation we're having today, the day before his original arbitration hearing was scheduled. And the Blue Jays and him seem to be on the same page, which bodes incredibly well, kind of just big picture, not just for Bichette, but for the prospect of extending Bichette once his time with the Blue Jays ends, and the prospect of extending other guys on this team like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Alek Manoah or Alejandro Kirk or anyone else who's in that conversation. And so the big picture of all this is really positive, and obviously we're really excited about that. But just right off the bat, we don't know the exact monetary value yet of the extension. We are assuming it's around $33 million. That's kind of what has been projected based on, the formula for what he would be expected to make first, second, and third year in arbitration. So that's kind of what we're estimating in that. But, big picture, what do you guys think this means? What do you make of this news for the Blue Jays and their relationship with Bichette?
I think, first of all, it at least means that they can, to some extent, agree on a contract. And that was the big thing, was if they go to arbitration, it's going to be a 1-year deal, presumably, and then who knows what's going to happen. They're going to have to deal with this next year, deal with this with Guerrero and everybody next year. I was a little nervous. I mean, let's be honest. I think we all were. And I think the whole PR thing was not a disaster yet, but it was definitely looking like it was going to be a little bit nerve-wracking. I will say, though, it is kind of funny that the people on Twitter that were like, oh, no, this guy should be exiled, never come back to the Blue Jays. You suck. You can't make a catch, blah, blah, blah. Basically, the people that were trashing Bichette are now saying, oh, thank God he's here for the next 3 seasons. And I think that just shows how polarizing this fan base is. And I don't know. It's whenever the fans want to hate on a guy, they hate on him. And then the contract comes and they're like, oh, no, it's okay. We actually don't really care. He's a good player. We want him on the team. But regardless, I think it is overall a good sign. The only thing that I will be a little bit nervous about going into the future is, why was it just a 3-year contract? Now, I understand why you don't want to necessarily lock him up for 8 to 15 years, if you will, like a massive extension right now. But we now have to redo this. Like, yeah, the arbitration is completely bought out, but now you have to re-sign him if you want to keep him. You still have to re-sign Guerrero, Manoah, all these players. And I know that's opening a can of worms that we're not necessarily going to be diving into just yet, but that's still something we need to consider, is that he is here for the next 3 seasons, but you still need to now re-go through this whole process later. And whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, time will tell at this point, but at least we can guarantee that he will be a Blue Jay for the next 3 seasons, unless something else happens, he's traded, which I really don't think is going to happen. But as of right now, I think I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. It's almost as if it's like you're putting duct tape over something where like water's coming out and you're just trying to stop the bleeding, or like a band-aid. They're stopping the bleeding, stopping Bo Bichette from having any type of, or him and management from having some type of big PR disaster. But you still have bigger issues that will eventually need to be figured out, and they will, unless Blue Jays want to lose him for nothing, which I highly doubt will happen. But for now, it's a good sign. All we can really do now is focus on playing baseball.
Great Scott, Jacob. You going after the fan base for criticizing Bo Bichette at the beginning of this process. But you know what? I guess at the end of the day, like you said, this is something that is now, I guess, officially on hold for a bit. And as much as you were talking about 3 years and all that, of course, as much as you question that, I think it's fairly obvious to why this was done. And not only was it obviously buying out the arbitration years, but it is obviously setting him up to go to the open market at the end of the 2025 season, which would be the 2026 offseason. So while it's important to acknowledge that he will still be a free agent and this still isn't completely solved, this helps with the bigger picture down the road when it comes to trying to make a deal. You didn't want to go to arbitration and then potentially dealing with this 2 more times, because this was year 1 out of year 3, or 3 eligible times he would have been eligible for arbitration. And then if you go to arbitration, let's just say worst case scenario, you go to arbitration 3 times before he's a free agent. You have no idea where the relationship can be at in terms of if it's ruined or not. And there's been situations in the past where it only took 1 arbitration hearing for something to be ruined, or something to just kind of, it's, you think about it. And as much as, again, we're not in the room, we spoke about this, how we don't exactly know the entire process. When you kind of talk about the gist of it in terms of you're literally sitting in a room, pretty much facing off against your team, and they're fighting for you to make lower money, you're fighting to make higher money, and you're literally right beside them, and they're probably saying, not saying the greatest things about you in some cases. I'm sure not all the time it's like that, but there's been probably cases in the past where you're beside your team and they're just flat out, or I should say the front office, and they're flat out, I wouldn't say ripping you, but they are making a case to why you are lower than what you think. And it's not always exactly the greatest feeling. You can't really imagine that feeling too good, being in a room with them like that. So the good part is, again, arbitration could be ignored for the next 3 years. And the other thing I've noticed too with this front office is that over the course of the last few seasons, it really does feel like they're pretty much trying to avoid arbitration as much as they can. Of course, Bo Bichette would have been the only Blue Jay that was going to arbitration this year before the deal was struck last night. And it feels like the last couple of years, we haven't seen a lot of arbitration cases with the Blue Jays. And it's just something that, of course, while they understand it's part of the system in place, and the worst case is you have to do an arbitration hearing, every effort to avoid that is definitely exercised. And again, this is another point or proving that case, is that they were working with Bo Bichette, and the feeling was obviously mutual for this to get done, because I don't think Bo Bichette wanted to do arbitration either. And that's the part where you pretty much have a couple years of security now, where you're making set salary. I know, Mark, you mentioned that it's going to be reportedly around the $33 million range. We haven't gotten the official announcement yet, so he can pretty much have that time now to focus on baseball. And I also do wonder, with this is the second offseason now where there was a little bit of a dispute. There was a dispute before this deal was struck, which is why they were going to arbitration. There was a dispute last year with the salary renewal situation. These next 2 to 3 years now that Bo Bichette has, because of that disagreement with the front office in terms of value, or in terms of, I guess, what he thinks he's worth, this further gives him the opportunity now to prove himself even more to the front office. And what I mean by prove himself, I mean specifically on defense. And of course, as much as his 2022 numbers looked great, pretty much that was due to the hot streak he had at the end of the summer and then September, because before that, we know how inconsistent it was. We know the numbers were down. Now he gets a chance to prove himself at defense, improve at defense, be more consistent at the plate. Perhaps that's the best part for him. And of course, the Jays would then get confidence, and perhaps they can strike a long-term deal done. I don't think that's out of the question that there's ever a chance for an extension. It's way too early to tell what his, I guess, aspirations are at the end of 2025. And then I just look at other situations around baseball, knowing that this was the largest gap. I believe Kyle Tucker and the Houston Astros have the exact same gap that the Jays and Bichette had, which was $7.5 to $5 million. and they have to go to arbitration. They did not reach a deal. They're going to arbitration. If you had to choose which situation you'd be in, I think everyone would really perhaps choose the Blue Jays side in terms of being in Bo Bichette's position rather than being the Houston Astros having to deal with Kyle Tucker. So it also, you wonder, Jacob, you touched on it a bit, for the front office standpoint, perhaps this also gives them time to focus on getting an extension done with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. rather than having only to worry about him, knowing that Bo Bichette, you can deal with that in a couple of years when the time's right. Now you can solely focus on potentially getting something done with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. It's just really good news to think about this. And the other thing too is, the last thing is that, as much as we talk about how it's kind of a short-term thing, this is still quite a long time. This is 3 seasons. Like, we can't ignore that. That's still a significant amount of time. And that gives them 3 opportunities to get a crack at the World Series, because we know that they're built to do, or to try and do it. And we know that they have the talent to do it. It's just a matter of it all coming together when it matters most.
Yeah. I mean, everything you said, like the potential damage of going to arbitration is big. We've seen it with Marcus Stroman, and we've seen it with other players where it doesn't end up really mattering, like the Ryan Taperas of the world, which is the last time that the Blue Jays went to arbitration with a player. But I mean, there are so many benefits for avoiding it, and seeing the Blue Jays steer clear of that path is really beneficial. And especially when you consider the alternative, right? The Blue Jays are, what's known as a file and trial team. They don't negotiate before arbitration hearings. That's just what they do, with the exception, obviously, of if it's a multi-year deal. And that's what the Blue Jays and Bo Bichette came to this year. So to see them make that progress, I think, is really encouraging. The fact that it is kind of enough that they are close enough in belief of what he's worth to come together to realize that, the fight in arbitration is not worth it. They can get past it. They can get a 3-year deal, put it to the side, and just worry about playing and winning for the next 3 years. I think it's enormous. I guess the question to you guys is the bigger picture. Like, do you guys think this bodes well for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or for Bo Bichette to get extended, or for Alek Manoah to get an extension, or whoever it may be? Like, Bryson, I know you mentioned, like, maybe this gives them more capacity to negotiate with Vladdy or Bo in the future. Like, do you think this bodes well? Do you think this increases the odds or the chances of the Blue Jays signing one of those guys to a long-term deal, just based on the fact that now they've shown a willingness to commit a couple years at once to a player, and now they've shown that they are on the same page as these guys, that they're having these conversations about what are you going to be worth over the next few years, and how do we make you happy so you don't, in this case, go to arbitration, but in the future hit the free agent market. So do you guys think it's more likely now than it was, say, a week ago?
I think it's complicated because, on one hand, this management has made big signings. Like, look, they just gave 7 years to Jose Barrios, which kicks in now. Like, that contract kicks in now. Springer, 6 years. Gosman, 5 years. Ryu, 4 years. Like, they are not unwilling to sign players. It's just, I think in this situation, it might make it a little bit better, specifically with Bo Bichette. I don't think that it necessarily impacts some of their other players. Like, I think this one was more specifically just to avoid arbitration and not have that mess of they figure out a contract this season, then they got to do something next season and the season before then, and then there's free agency. I think if there's guys like Vladdy, like Manoah, like other players, like even, Dalton Varsho, he hasn't played a game yet, but he's eventually going to hit arbitration with the Blue Jays. Like, I think it proves that they're at least willing to make those types of contracts where if they need to just get their way through to free agency, they'll do it. But when it comes to guys that they don't need to do that for, and when they sign everybody else, I think that those other players will definitely sign long term. And I say that, and we still haven't seen it. I mean, it is getting a little nerve wracking. And I think one of our episodes within the last month or so, I said that if by the end of 2023, if there's a big player that isn't signed long term, like Vladdy, like Manoah, etc., then I'm going to be a little bit concerned. But I don't think that this whole Bo Bichette thing necessarily impacts that. I think that if basically, like, they have the rest of the offseason to sign someone, which I don't really think they're going to give Vladdy an extension right now, but once the season ends, and I know that's looking forward quite a ways away, like we're only in February right now, but once we get to that point of the year, I do think that they'll make an effort to go and sign these players like Guerrero, who is going to be arbitration again. Like, I really think that the players like that will sign some type of long-term deal going into the future. And Who knows? I think that with this management, it is weird because like they do sign these big contracts, but then they'll also just only do 3 years or only do arbitration or not do anything and trade a player like Teoscar or like Lourdes where they didn't think that they were going to re-sign them. But when it comes to these cornerstones of your franchise, and we've seen this all throughout baseball, Wander Franco got that huge contract. We're seeing it even the established stars like Mike Trout getting that huge contract a couple of years back or whenever it was. I think if you have a player that is borderline generational talent, or at least generational in terms of your franchise, they're going to go and lock them up. And so when it comes to just the future of the key and like most key pieces of this team, like Guerrero, like Manoah, I wouldn't be surprised if they just go and sign them long term at the end of the year.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm totally with you on Alek Manoah being done right away. I look at the clock on him. He isn't even arbitration eligible till 2025. Like he still has a couple of years until you have to worry about that. But of course, that is something that you are eventually going to have to address. Another thing, or another player that we haven't mentioned yet, who, I mean, this is somebody that they're going to have to take care of as early as next year or see what happens, is that's Matt Chapman. I mean, and they did the similar approach what you were talking about, Jacob. They took away the arbitration, and then they basically signed him through this year because he was technically arbitration eligible this season. And then, of course, the Jays got the extension done last offseason. But he's going to be on the open market unless there's some sort of extension by spring training. So I thought about it when I said it earlier that now that you basically push Bo Bichette for in the future, you have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. you can focus on, because that's always the guy that I thought, and I believe we're all in agreement here. Or maybe your percentages have decreased a bit, but that's always been the guy that I've thought is the first contract that's going to be handed out to. And with Bo Bichette, it's still, for me, it's very difficult to understand what it's going to be like at the end. Like, I don't want to say it's a lock. He's not going to, sign an extension. He's going to go to the open market. I probably right now, from what we know, because it's so unclear, is I'd probably put it 50-50 down the middle, as I don't know. But that's something, or a risk or whatever. Those are odds clearly that the Jays are willing to deal with when the time comes. And until then, you can maintain a good relationship with him rather than, I guess, putting things on the brink of a disaster, because there was lots of talk about that from the fan base. I'm not saying it was accurate, but just a lot of people were talking about it, and you touched on it earlier, Jacob, at the beginning of the episode with all the slander and all that. So the fact that they can focus now, or at least I think, and I think the percentage of a Vladimir Guerrero Jr. extension is a lot higher than 50%. I still think this is something that they're going to get done, and I just like how they push this forward so they can focus on him. They can focus on Matt Chapman. And of course, basically when they have to, I guess, deal with Bo Bichette, then that's when you have to deal with Alek Manoah as well, because of, I guess, the clock I was talking about in terms of him being arbitration eligible in 2025, or perhaps that's something they deal with quickly before Bo Bichette. It just gives them a little bit more flexibility when you're having a good problem here, when you have a lot of talent and you got to find ways to pretty much spread the money elsewhere. And for Bo Bichette too, as I touched on earlier about him proving himself defensively and all that, he gets more opportunities to do that now. And you just look around the contracts, I mean, for shortstops all across the league. And we've seen a ton this offseason. We saw a ton last offseason. Guys that come to mind are Corey Seager, Trey Turner, who got it this season. Xander Bogaerts got another one. Carlos Correa, as much as he signed with 3 different teams, he eventually got paid. Dansby Swanson got paid. And then, of course, Javier Baez and Trevor Story got paid last year. And you just look at their average salary in terms of making pretty much at least $25 million a year for all those guys. Bo Bichette is in for a hefty payday if he remains at shortstop and he can clean up defensively. Because if you can't clean it up defensively, then the conversations about the whole second base thing kind of pop up again. And if he goes to second base, I don't think it's as guaranteed he makes a deal that big compared to what these shortstops have made. So that's why I think it's a win-win. And I do think that it increases their odds of maintaining that relationship, working on an extension, or at least trying to get an extension done, as well as working on an extension with a guy like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And of course, focusing on the short-term issue with the guy that's going to hit the open market next year, and that's Matt Chapman.
Yeah, everything you just said. Like, I do think the odds of extending these guys is a little bit greater now, just because the Blue Jays have shown a willingness to have that discussion. Like, we really haven't heard much from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Bo Bichette, or from any reporter or team statement or whatever about these conversations happening. But I think the fact that they have now had this conversation with Bo Bichette and his agent opens the door a little bit to seeing what happens in the future. And so I think That's a good sign. And so I think the odds have increased that these conversations are at least going to be happening now. I do think I think you're a bit too confident on Vladdy. I will say, or Bo Bryson. I think you're a bit too confident on the Blue Jays signing him long term, because to me, I think the odds are probably 50-50 for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And then I think for Bo Bichette, it's maybe, I don't know, 35%, 40% odds that the Blue Jays sign him long term. And then the other thing I'll disagree with you on is the fact that I think the Blue Jays should endeavor on signing Alek Manoah now. We had this conversation when we were talking about Vladdy and Bo. The template, at least by the team that's leading the way in extensions, the Atlanta Braves, is get these guys early. Like, don't wait until they're hitting arbitration years and they've shown their value and they are getting ready for a free agency run and they're going to be asking for a lot of money. Like, sign these guys early when there's some uncertainty, like the Fernando Tatis Jr. pathway or the J-Rod pathway out in Seattle, or the pathway in Atlanta where they're signing all these guys super young. And so I think Alek Manoah, now is a perfect time to sign him. Why wait until he's worth more? Why wait until he proves himself more in the majors when you already have the projections and you already have the eye test that shows he's a damn good pitcher? So why wait until he gets his value up? Just sign him now for a team-friendly deal, buy out his arbitration years now, and buy out a couple years of his free agency and get a team-friendly deal. So I'll disagree with you on that one. I think the Blue Jays should start working towards it now, see if they can make something happen. Obviously, the ship has kind of sailed this offseason, because we know a lot of players don't like to discuss this type of thing in season. So you probably have to wait until next offseason to get something done, but go for it. Like, why wait until he hits arbitration or wait until he has 1 or 2 years left before free agency to make a deal happen? I say go for it now. Maybe it's lower on the priority list because of Chapman, like you mentioned, but I think it should be at least be a conversation that the Blue Jays are having now, because he's only going to get more pricey the longer you wait.
Well, two things. First of all, I completely forgot to mention Matt Chapman. He, and I've seen this throughout Twitter, he, I think, is like, if the Blue Jays lose him, they are in some deep trouble. Like, obviously he doesn't hit for average, but if you have a platinum glove winner, like, you have one of the best defensive third basemen in the game, like, without a doubt, and a guy that is not going to hit for power, but him and Varsho will still hit you combined, I don't know, 50, 55 bombs. Like, those two, speaking of Matt Chapman specifically, you need to keep him on this team. And the thing with Alek Manoah, I think if this was 2 or 3 seasons ago, like maybe 2020 when they bring him up, obviously they didn't, but say they did, then I'd be like, okay, maybe the hesitancy is a little bit there. Or if we were in the same position now where he's starting to get really good, starting to get close to arbitration. But this team's in win now mode. Like, you have Gosman, Barrios, Manoah, Chris Bassett for the next 3 seasons minimum. Obviously, there's a lot of other, longer term deals there, but your rotation pretty much is set for at least the next 3 years, probably 4 or 5 if you can keep them here. Like, this team, when they're in win now mode and you have superstars on your team, I think you got to, this is perfect timing here. You have the chance to win, and you have the players that can potentially keep you winning for the next 4 or 5 seasons. So I think that you got to bring Alek Manoah in at least medium term. Like, I'm not saying offer him a 10-year contract, although, maybe they do that and that ends up being a genius move, but give him 4 or 5-ish, 6 seasons. Maybe 6 is too much, but you know what I mean? Like, give him a medium-ish size contract, keep him on this team. Best case, he becomes one of the best Blue Jay pitchers ever and helps them win a championship. Worst case, I don't know. Things, you know what I mean? Like, things could completely go sideways. But I think that if you're in win now mode, you got to lock up your guys that are going to help you win now till you think that they can't, or until you think the team will not be at least winning now.
Yeah, I got a completely different viewpoint from you guys. And I look at it and I understand what both of you are saying, but really the only counter that I really have for that is you look at what they're dealing with now. And we talked about Bo Bichette, talked about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. This front office doesn't do that. They're not Alex Anthopoulos. They're not signing 8 guys under control and paying them early. As much as that's an approach and that's just a way that Alex Anthopoulos does business, and that could definitely pay out in the long run, it's definitely a risk. But what I'm saying is this front office doesn't do that. So why think they're going to all of a sudden do it with Alek Manoah? You talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. This guy Jacob, you said it, generational talent. We were hyping this kid up when he was playing rookie ball in Bluefield. And all of a sudden, he's basically a couple years away now from free agency because this was the first year of arbitration. And he still isn't locked up. And you guys were talking about other stars around the league, and we talked about it all summer about it, and basically how the Jays are different with that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but you really have to look at it from reality, and you can throw out hypotheticals about signing this guy for 7 years, paying him young. They don't do that. And that's why until I see them do that, I have no, I guess, faith or confidence that it's ever something they will do. And that's why basically what they're doing is they're using that clock. They have basically the couple years of salary renewal before you have the 3 years of arbitration. And then, of course, that's the open market. So they have this window to work with. They're clearly pushing it. And we know that Bo Bichette's going right to the end of it now. It's still unclear of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I still think out of all the extensions or all the long-term contracts that we can think of, he's the one that's going to get it first. That's a guy that's under team control for the next couple of years before he hits the market. And of course, we know Matt Chapman, but he's in a different situation. So that's the only reason why I think differently from you guys on that, is because I'm not saying it's a wrong approach that you guys have, because it's not. It's definitely something that we see across the game. It's just with this front office, I can't believe in that because they've never done that, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way they are.
They don't operate that way, but they should. Like, that's the bottom line
That's
to
an
me,
opinion.
I think. Like, it is an opinion, obviously, but they should do things that way. Like, I think it's a good way of doing business. I think it makes sense, especially when you have someone who's proved that they can be that good. And it's not just the Atlanta Braves that are doing this, right? I mentioned the Mariners, I mentioned the Padres. Wander Franco and the Tampa Bay Rays got into the action a little bit. So, like, you see really smart teams all around baseball making these same decisions to spend this money, and a heck of a lot of money, right? We're talking more than $200 million for a lot of these guys, and they're making the decision to spend that money now. So I don't think this is kind of ill-advised or whatever. Like, I think it's a good strategy, and I think the Blue Jays should do it. And obviously the trade-off that you have is like a potentially cheaper deal, but if you wait longer, you have more certainty of their quality as a player, right? Like, it's possible that Alek Manoah pulls a Jose Barrios and comes out next season is terrible, and then the question goes, okay, how legit is this guy? Is he going to actually be that good? So, like, that's the trade-off that you have, and that's probably the reason why the Blue Jays have for waiting for a lot of these guys. But I don't know. I just think a lot of the smart people around baseball, including, I think, the smartest team in baseball and some of the smartest minds in baseball, and the Tampa Bay Rays, are doing the exact same thing with Wander Franco. They gave him a lot of money really early in his MLB career, and I don't see a reason why the Blue Jays shouldn't do the same thing. I don't know if either of you have closing thoughts on that.
I'll just echo what you're saying. Like, it does make sense. I mean, you think about it. We talked about Guerrero being like that number one prospect, and he was the number one prospect in all of baseball when he came up. Obviously, has he been number one prospect material since then? Not really, but well, he's had flashes of it, but he's not been crazy. He's not been, as Mark called him, the second coming of Christ, unfortunately. But you look at, like, when they were rebuilding, it
If
was
I
like,
remember correctly, that quote was used as fans expecting him to be the second coming of Christ, and him being a letdown.
The chosen one.
Yeah, no, I love that quote. I think about it more often than I'm going to admit here. But when they were rebuilding, it was getting Guerrero, Bichette, Biggio, unfortunately not really panning out. But then they had Manoah doing well. Then they had Jansen. Then out of nowhere, Kurt comes up. Like, when they were rebuilding for the players that they currently have, and then they made external acquisitions. Like, I think if you're willing, maybe this is a bad take, and I'll just put it out there, but if you're willing to give Kevin Gausman a ton of money after a couple good seasons, Alek Manoah's had a couple good seasons. I don't see why you don't at least give him 3 to 5 years. Like, that's what I mean. Like, it's easy to say that they don't give money, and I could see from your reactions, maybe this is the worst take I've ever had here. But what I'm getting at is, like, if they're going to rebuild and you clearly have good talent, why waste it and potentially lose out on some of them because their money or their worth is now doubled or quadrupled? Like, if you have the talent now, I'd lock as many of them up as you can. And if you can't, do what they did with Hernandez and Gurriel. Like, go get someone else that will hopefully bridge you to a longer date.
Yeah, I can't look at the similar, I guess, the comparison you made just because of the clock. Like, Kevin Gausman was a free agent who's gone through all of that process in terms of that window before, the team control window is what I'm trying to say. So, I don't, as much as you can argue it is a risk that they are waiting on this. And I've seen how this front office has operated over the last couple of years. We all have. And I mean, they went from villains when they came in here, and all of a sudden when this team got competitive, they've been making some really good moves. And that's why, like, if you're going to tell me that Mark Shapiro was going to let Vladimir Guerrero Jr. walk just like that, like you can't even sell me on the idea that he'd let that happen. That's why I'm obviously the most optimistic one with the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. extension. And I truly believe as much, and Mark Shapiro has been talking a lot the last couple of days. And I was going to actually ask you guys if you think this ties into it. I mean, you saw his piece with the Toronto Sun, I think it was with Rob Longley, and he was basically saying about how, this team needs to win. We have expectations for them to win. We also connected the dots of the moves they made in the offseason. And Mark Shapiro hinted at it a little bit in terms of, accountability, seriousness. I don't want to quote him quote for quote because I don't have it in front of me, but he addressed that a little bit in terms of what he said with Rob Longley. So maybe this is also them waiting to commit to these guys because they want to see them win. And the fact of the matter is they've come short the last couple of years, which they have, but they've gotten better. And this is really another season where they have a legitimate shot at making a good run in the postseason. And we feel like those needs were addressed this past offseason in terms of the bullpen and everything like that. But maybe that's also part of their approach. They need to wait. They need to see them earn it rather than being gifted a $300 million contract and then you're going in a motorcycle accident and then you're getting suspended for PEDs like Fernando Tatis Jr. was, or Julio Rodriguez, who doesn't even, or had less than a year.
He just had a worm infection.
Exactly. It was a worm infection.
It was a tapeworm.
Yeah.
It was a faulty Gatorade bottle.
J-Rod, less than a year of service time. So what you guys say, it's not wrong. Believe me, it's not wrong. The only thing where I see different is just knowing how this front office operates. So if they want to go with that approach, like you guys said, and commit to Alek Manoah or do anything like that before they get to the market, I trust them at this point where whatever they do decide, I'm sold on right now with that. So that's why I'll completely leave the door open to that. I think they're not, they're obviously not planning for them to leave for nothing. I really do think this is something that they're eventually going to get done, and perhaps waiting to see how this team does and making them earn it by winning on the field. Maybe that has a little bit of something to do with it. Maybe not all, but a little bit.
And to be honest, it seems like the approach that this team is taking instead of extending is trading these guys with a year of service time left. Like that's what we saw with Teo. And that's what we saw with Lourdes. So that might be their philosophy, that just might be the way they work. And I guess we'll see year 5 of Alek Manoah or year 5 of Vlad or Bo, what they do. I really doubt they would trade a player of quite that caliber, but we'll see. I mean, the door is open to anything at this point. Okay, let's talk a little bit about spring training, and specifically, let's talk about the broadcasts. Sports then announced today that they're going to have television broadcasts of every single one of the Blue Jays 16 home games, and they're going to have select coverage of road games to be announced at a later date. And Sportsnet also announced their broadcast crew for the entire season being led by Dan Schulman on the play-by-play mic, and Buck Martinez is back in the analyst role. And then we're also going to get Joe Siddall, who returns to the broadcast booth on TV for occasional select series. We've got Hazel May and Arden Zwelling as sideline reporters. Arash Madani appears to be out of the Blue Jays broadcast crew. I know some people are really happy about that. That seems to be the general consensus on Twitter. Bryson, you're trying your best to keep a straight face. To be honest, I don't really care. It's Hazel May or bust for me. Anyone else, I'm going to be disappointed watching the broadcast. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. Radio is Ben Wagner. Solo call, once again, I'm disappointed in Sportsnet for not giving him someone to bounce off of, because the broadcast quality improves so much when he has someone in the booth. Not to knock Ben Wagner. He's fantastic at his job. And then to round out the crew, they've got the Blue Jays central staff, which stays the exact same as it was last year. They have Jamie Campbell in the lead chair. They have Joe Siddall, who's filling in. And then they have Caleb Joseph as the one player who's filling in and offering some analysis as well. And I'm very proud that I did all of that off of memory. So I deserve a medal for that. Okay, The Arden's Welling Rashmandani conversation. You guys have at it. I gave my opinion.
First of all, I gotta congratulate you because I genuinely thought you were reading that out like completely off of
I'm
a
a
graphic.
professional.
It was well
What can I say?
done.
No,
It was
no, that
well
was
done.
really good. Oh man, but so one more thing before I talk about the Arash Madani thing. I'm going to admit this because I thought it was hilarious. When I looked at that graphic, I swore it was Bradley Zimmer, not Caleb Joseph. I don't know why.
I saw another joke where people were asking if like Caleb Joseph was gonna wear his his Blue Jays uniform on the desk.
Yeah,
I
he
guess
hasn't done a
Sportsnet
Sportsnet.
doesn't have a staff picture of him.
Not
No,
yet.
he's been there for like
Yeah.
a
They
year.
just included his Blue Jays headshot in that. I was like,
That's
There were
why I
lots
thought
of
it was
jokes.
Zimmer. Oh
People
gosh.
had fun with that. Yeah.
No, okay. So I hate to rip on a guy because I don't inherently hate Arash Madani, but there's only so many times I can hear, what does this mean? How does it feel in an interview? Like like I'm laughing because it's not nice, but it's like there's only so many times you can hear that. And I don't know. I don't mind anybody else's. Bryson's losing it over here, but I don't mind anybody else. I like who they have. Arash Madani, like I'm sure he'll find work somewhere else, but I like who they have. I'm confident in who they have. I think it's honestly a very well-rounded crew, and I have honestly no problems with it.
to be clear, Arash Madani is not leaving Sportsnet. He's
Yeah.
still employed by
Yeah.
Sportsnet. Right now, he's in Arizona for the Super Bowl. So, like, he's still got a job. He's
Pretty
just
good gig.
taking a step back from Jay's broadcast.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna make sure. Unless there was something that I was missing. But look, yeah, I'm not for ripping on a guy for losing a role in a particular area. And of course that seems to be the case where Sportsnet decided to go in a different direction or change things up beside Hazel May, because of course she's the best at what she does with that. And the odd time it's somebody else stepping in. And that's why last year it was Arash Madani at times, but there were also some times too where Arden Zwelling got a chance to also fill in a few times too. So I think he also was on the radio a couple of times. Mark, I know you're the biggest radio guy out of all of us, so I will say I also am.
He filled
Go
in
ahead.
on the radio as well as Ben
Yeah.
Nicholson Smith was also on the radio a little bit. They
And
kind of
Caleb
had a
Joseph,
cycling
too.
cast. And
Yeah.
Caleb Joseph.
I agree with you on that one though. I was kind of disappointed that, I feel like the 590 really took the biggest hit in terms of the pandemic. And really, I think at the beginning of the year, Ben Wagner wasn't even traveling. So it kind of loosened up as the year went on. It just, for me, yeah, I also agree with that. I was just disappointed they didn't really kind of fulfill that or, get it back to where it was before the pandemic. But other than that, I guess with the Arden Zwelling thing, look, I like Arden Zwelling as well. I think he does great stuff for Sportsnet, and the different roles he was in last year, he seemed to really do a good job on that. So good for him for getting that role. And I'm not here to bash anybody, but it is going to be a little bit of a different, it's a little, I'll say this in terms of my preference with no disrespect. I find it a little refreshing that it's going to be somebody else stepping in the role with Hazel May. And I will say this, of course, we all love Joe Soto. I think we've spoken about him so many times about how good he is on the desk. And then the odd time where Buck is on a break or Dan Shulman's on a break, whatever it is, he can step in, travel with the road trip or whatever, be at a homestand. And he has great insight because he also used to be in the radio booth. So that's my other highlight. Of course, the notable highlight, Buck Martinez is back for a full season, thank goodness. And it appears that he is now the full-time analyst. So he's no longer, unless I guess Dan Shulman's away or there's some other agreement where he's basically going to be the color guy for most of the year. And whenever Dan Shulman's there with him, he will be the color guy. So that's good news that Buck's going to be back though for the entire season. And then the last thing I'll say is I really did enjoy, I don't think we've ever spoken about Caleb Joseph, but I really did enjoy Caleb Joseph when he was at the desk last year. I thought he did a really good job for somebody who was relatively new to the industry in the area in terms of, being on TV and being that guy and that analyst or being on the desk with Blue Jays Central with Jamie Campbell. I mean, Jamie Campbell can work with anybody. And I think we all know how good of a reputation he has as well. So it's really cool that Joe Siddle is going to be staying. He's going to have a little bit more responsibility, which is a win for all of us. And then Caleb Joseph, who I thought did really well, he's officially slotted in now as a guy at the desk. I really enjoyed his insight and basically his take. So I think that this broadcast team heading into this year, it looks really solid on paper. And I'm really excited to, I guess, with the content, because I thought Sportsnet, and they always have done a really good job with Blue Jays content.
Just one thing quickly. How come, like, we're talking about the radio? I'm surprised Arash didn't just translate there. Like, I know it's not as easy as that, but I don't
think he doesn't have experience doing
Yeah,
it.
fair.
That wouldn't go well on Twitter.
I don't. I would just like to see him. You know what I
That
mean?
too.
Like, you never want to see somebody leave. Like, I do genuinely enjoy
Yeah.
everybody I see there. It's just like you said, it is a little bit refreshing.
I will say the Blue Jays have like some of the best in the business at all these positions, right? Like it doesn't get better than Jamie Campbell and Joe Siddall. And in the broadcast booth, I mean, Dan Schulman is one of the best play-by-play announcers, not just in
Friend of the
baseball.
show.
He is a friend of the show, but he's not just the best in baseball. He's the best in North American sports, like ESPN, World Series radio, college hoops in the States. Like it doesn't get better than Dan Schulman. He is top of the top of the top. And so we're really, really lucky to get him for what appears this year to be, if not 162, pretty darn close to it. And then of course, Hazel May, I think like, again, it doesn't get any better than that. I think she is the best in the business of being a sideline reporter. And, you know, anytime, no knock against Arden or Arash, but anytime she's not on the broadcast, I think the broadcast suffers just because she is so exceptional at what she does. So yeah, we're really lucky to be able to watch this crew day in and day out. And the only complaint I have is Sportsnet not backing the radio product a little bit more. I know I'm probably one of the rare people who actually does listen to the radio, but you know, when you're out and about, you pull it up on your phone, you're listening in the car. It's disappointing that it's just Ben Wagner. It makes the broadcast suffer a little bit. So I'm disappointed about that. But it is what it is, and we're still pretty darn lucky with what they have on the TV side of things. Okay. I think the last thing we have to talk about quickly is a question that we got from one of our listeners. Naden is coming through again with another amazing question. They ask, who are you most excited to watch during spring training? I've got a clear answer for this. I don't need much discussion on this one. For me, it is far and away Dalton Varsho. I think having a new guy on the team is always very exciting to just figure out what he's about, right? We've never seen this guy play. We've seen the highlights, sure, but like just learning what his swing is like, how he approaches things in the outfield, what he's like on the base pass. Like to me, the new kids on the block is the most exciting part of spring training, getting to watch those guys, getting to know them a little bit, what the dynamic is like in the clubhouse, getting our first interviews and quotes with him. I'm really excited to see him in action, and I'm curious who you guys pick as the most exciting player to watch, or the guy you're most excited to watch in spring training.
Well, I was going to say Varsho for those same reasons, but I'm also going to say Jose Barrios because we all know what he needs to do. 7-year extension starts this season. ERA was terrible last season. He has a big season coming up, and I think that spring training will be a big indicator of has the offseason work paid off. And I know obviously still's got to play the season, but I'm looking forward to see what version of Jose Barrios are we getting? Are we getting the 2022 version, or are we getting basically the other version, which is the much better and much more durable Barrios?
That's your ace, Jacob. And I mean, I don't know how many times we've hinted at it, and we're going to say it again in the official prediction. That's the X factor for this rotation this year. But in terms of excitement, I'm glad that none of you took my answer. And then this kind of coincides a bit with Sportsnet's announcement, because as much as they pretty much finalized the broadcast team, they also confirmed that all 16 home games are going to be televised. And of course, there's also going to be some road games that are televised. So we're going to see a lot of this team in spring training. Varsho's it's actually a really good answer. I didn't even think of that one, but it makes sense about how he's the new guy, and we're going to get a good sense of him defensively. But my answer, and the television part of this, is a reason why I think it solidifies it for me, and that's Ricky Tiedemann. I want to see Ricky Tiedemann pitch as much as I can in the spring. I think he's going to get some opportunities early on, perhaps near the end. Usually they send him down to minor league camp, but I think early on, Ricky's going to get some starts. And as long as they're the home games, so we can see them on TV, and Dan Schulman's calling it, sign me up any day of the week to see Ricky Tiedemann. So I'll hand it back over to you, Mark. I actually have a question for you guys too, but I'll let you finish off on this quickly.
Well, I don't have any finishing thoughts, only that you'll be able to listen to all of these games with only one guy on the broadcast, unfortunately, but you will be able to hear it. I don't think Sportsnet it's not always on Sportsnet 590, right? Sometimes it's just MLB at bat, or what are they calling it now? The MLB
.com, yeah.
.com, .tv, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, go ahead.
Well, I just found something interesting yesterday, actually, and it was basically a piece from The Athletic in terms of, I know you saw this, Mark, when MLB eventually expands to 32 teams, there was like a proposed realignment about how
Hmm.
I guess things would look. I think it was from Jim Bowden, and basically what he did was the AL and the NL are abolished. So I just want to get your guys' thoughts quickly. And basically, he had the Blue Jays obviously in the North Division, and I mean, if you look at the teams in the division with them, it's the Cincinnati Reds, the Cleveland Guardians, and the Detroit Tigers. I just thought, what you
Sign
guys
me
saw
up.
in terms of
Sign
that,
me
yeah.
up.
And then I think the expansion teams I think he listed were Charlotte and Nashville. But basically, when that happens, a complete reform of the alignment. I mean, I think we would all sign up for that, and I think it'd be pretty cool though to see that type of change as well through all of baseball. I don't know what you guys thought.
I absolutely love it with every bone in my body. I've been calling for this for, I don't know, since 2017, 2018. This league needs 32 teams. You might hate when I say that there should be 16 teams. I was going to say 15, but I don't know why, but there should be 16 teams in the playoffs. I like the way the NBA does it. Obviously, it wouldn't be this way, but 32 teams needs to be the way it is. And if that's your division, Blue Jays might be the Raptors when they were in their prime. Like they'll be winning that division absolutely like every single season. But
Look at you ending things off on a hot note.
no, but like
Holy.
realistically, I think this would first of all, I think that the way that the schedule is now, where you play every team is good, is a lot better than the one last year. But this realignment, to me, I think it would be a lot better for the game, and it would be just, I think, more entertaining not to see the same few teams for 20 straight seasons.
The only downside to this, I think, is that you lose some of the rivalries. Like you're playing non-exciting teams. Like what was it? It was Cleveland,
Cincinnati and Detroit.
yeah. Like to be honest, like if any of those teams come to the Rogers Center this season, like you're just kind of, what's next? Like who are we playing next week? Like it gets rid of the Yankees. As much as the schedule, the ease of competition is a lot easier. They're not exciting teams. I will say though, under this alignment, I think I saw it was the Yankees, the Mets, the Red Sox, and the Phillies. I think were all
Yes,
put
the
in one
East.
division, and that would be entertaining. That would be must-watch television every night. So I would say, like, you lose the entertainment aspect, you gain the competitive edge. So I don't know, it's a trade-off, but I would not complain. And I assume under this, you'd also be getting more equal scheduling, kind of like what we have this year, where it's less against your division rivals and more just against the entire league. So I don't know, fun hypotheticals. And the Athletic also had a great series previewing kind of the four most likely cities to get an expansion team, with Montreal, what was it? Montreal, Las Vegas, Portland, and Nashville, I think. That's a great series if you want to learn more about, some of those cities that are involved.
Actually sounds pretty good. I mean, I've been wanting one down in Nashville for a while. That'd be pretty awesome. I mean, well, Nashville and Montreal, I think, are the two ones where I'd want. Like, I know I don't want to sound as if I'm just being like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, whatever. No,
I
I
didn't know
think.
you like Nashville.
Well, no,
Neither
like,
did
I've never
I.
heard that word
well, no,
before from you.
I've never been
Have you
there,
been
but
to Nashville?
no, I
I've
wish.
been.
No, but it's a nice city. They got hockey there. You might as well expand it. It would make it, more entertaining.
It makes sense. You're a big Luke Combs fan, so I
Oh,
mean,
we're not.
Nashville.
For the record, nothing against him,
Capital
but no,
of
I'm not. We're
country.
not changing conversation.
Okay. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up today's episode. Oh, Jacob, you got something to add?
I forgot. I meant to say this. I set a reminder on my phone and the reminder went late into the episode. I was going to say this.
Oh no.
It's going to be quick. I was going to say this in the beginning, but and this isn't baseball related, but congratulations to LeBron James for now being the official highest scorer in NBA history.
Wow.
I just thought we'd mention that. Like things like that do not happen
New one
often.
on the bingo card.
Wow,
The GOAT, right?
Top two. But
The GOAT.
congratulations.
We're not opening that.
We are
can
not
of worms
opening.
on
Yes,
this
no.
episode.
But top two player, congratulations. Saw that on TV live. Definitely was an amazing moment.
Okay. And then on that totally non-Blue Jays related note, we'll wrap up for this week. This is officially the last week in more than 9 months that we won't have baseball. We got pitchers and catchers reporting.
We're here.
In a week, right?
Next Thursday.
End of next week, right? So probably exactly a week by the time people are listening to this. So very exciting time. And I know, people who were around last season probably have a picture of this, but just to remind everyone, we're going to be doing probably around weekly episodes during spring training, unless there's something big that happens. I know we had some trades and signings last year that we had to get in. And then right before the season starts, we'll be doing a preview episode with our predictions for 2023. We'll be predicting everything, roster, over-unders, who's going to lead the team in WAR, which Jacob will presumably mess up again. How many home runs Vladdy will have, those sorts of questions, and of course the Blue Jays' final record. And then we're off to the races. We're doing episodes after every single series of the regular season. And we can't wait. It's going to be a great season, but we still got a bit to go until then. Spring training, pitchers and catchers reporting next week. The only thing I'll plug this week is our Buy Me a Coffee page. You can find it on our social media. The link is at our link tree, which is linktree/section 138 pod. Go check it out. We appreciate anything you can give. And with that, we'll catch you next time.